Hello, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to talk about 10 oddball horror films, sort of under the radar horror films that you may not have heard of, that are really quite weird and don't seem to fit into any sort of typical horror genre. Now, the king of oddball horror films, if you've never seen it, is a film called House, or Hausa, by Nobuhiko Obayashi. It's a Japanese film from the 1970s. It was released the same year as Star Wars, 1977, but it feels like something from the 1980s. It's way ahead of its time. Now, the storyline is this. A group of schoolgirls go and stay with one of the girls' aunts in an old house in the forest, and the aunt is a witch, and the witch and the house try and eat the girls. Okay, so it's quite odd to start with. You ain't heard nothing yet. This is one of the strangest movies ever made. It is bonkers. And it's bonkers before they get to the house. You don't have to wait till they get to the house. It's odd right from the very beginning. The best way to describe this, it's not really a horror film. It's got horror elements. It's got gore. It's got girls being eaten by pianos. It's got dismembered limbs flying through the air. It's got all the gore elements that you want. But it's kind of like Obayashi he was famous in Japan for being an advertisement maker. And this film, it's about 87 minutes long. It's like one great big advert for sort of like teenage girl things like pop culture and popcorn and movies and music. It's got this kind of day glow, you know, sort of light-hearted, cutesy feel about it all the way through the film with this intense energy. It's like, the equivalent of kids eating these kind of tartrazine sweets and having all this energy. The whole film's like that. It's completely bonkers. It has, the editing is all over the place with, irises in, irises out. It plays with all sorts of in-camera effects, and it keeps showing off the artificiality. So a lot of scenes are done in front of, obviously painted backdrops or obviously sort of CSO'd green screen backdrops. And it has films within films, so that a flashback sequence is done in old style black and white Japanese cinema. It's done very well, actually. It shows this girl's family, her grandparents during the war. And it flits between all sorts of different registers. One minute there's a song scene where this girl walks through a garden singing. The next there's this girl being dismembered by an evil piano. The next there's some kind of psychedelic sequence with legs and arms and heads floating through this psychedelic world. The next moment a disembodied head is biting a girl on the bum. There's lots of perving over young teenage girls who seem to be losing their clothes all over the place. I mean, it's bonkers. Anything that you could think of in a movie, it's in this movie, and it has a relentless energy and pace. It never lets go. I kind of admire it for that alone. There is nothing else like this in cinema. It's a complete one-off, and that's another reason why I admire it. Whether I think it's a great movie or not, I couldn't tell you. I don't know whether it's a great movie or not. It's so mad, it defeats any kind of criticism. But you've got to see it. If you have any interest in horror or Japanese culture or cinema that is basket case insane and will leave you questioning whether you should be in an asylum, this is a film you've got to see. Another film that might leave you feeling a bit odd and a bit mad is Possession, directed by Andrei Zulawski, starring Sam Neill and Isabella Gianni. You might have come across this film. It was made in 1981. And at first glance, it appears to be quite a serious art film, European art film, in which Sam Neill plays a businessman who comes back from a trip, and he starts to feel that his wife, Isabella Gianni, is having an affair. She wants a divorce. And little does he know that she is kind of having an affair with an octopus, or some kind of tentacled beast, some kind of Lovecraftian horror that lives in an apartment. It's that kind of film. And even that doesn't connect with how the film makes you feel. I've never come across a film in my life that sustains such an atmosphere of intense hysteria. It's like the whole film, the actors and you are like this. And this leads to a climactic scene, a very famous scene. Once seen, never forgotten. You know the scene I'm talking about, those people who've seen the movie, is the scene with Isabella Gianni in the subway. Oh my God, the first time I saw this scene, it's about a 2 minute scene, and I was sitting there just going, what? To this day, I'm not really sure what's happening in that scene. Either Isabella Gianni in this rather horrible subway is having the orgasm of her life. There's all sorts of white goo coming from her mouth and other areas. Um, or she's being possessed by some spirit, or she's giving birth to some demon. There are various theories about it on the internet. I'm never quite sure. I don't think it really matters because it's such an extraordinary piece of acting. Ajani afterwards said the film almost gave her a breakdown. She never quite recovered from it. Sam Neill also said the same thing, even though it was his favourite movie that he's ever worked on. You'll feel like that as an audience member. It's not the kind of movie, you want to get the family round with the kids and the grandma, and there's Isabella Gianni having this cosmic orgasm. But if if you're made of stern stuff, it's a one-off movie that you've got to try. It's extraordinary. And I don't think there are many movies, sort of serious, respectable movies, that get so close to the tension and the hysteria of a relationship, a marriage breaking down, of sexual jealousy, of resentment. Using this metaphor of horror to really get to the real depths of feeling. Zulaski wrote it and made it during his own divorce, and you can kind of feel it, the power of it. It's really wrenching. No other film quite gets to that. I'm not sure that makes the film very likeable, but God, it's impressive. Talking of love affairs with monsters, a recent film, a film called Spring. This was a debut film by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, two independent American filmmakers. Check this film out. It's an interesting little curio. It came out a few years ago. And it's about this American guy. The film starts in this kind of almost near-realist fashion with... One of the things I like about the film is that the protagonist is an ordinary American young man who's not terribly likeable. He's just an ordinary guy. He has a pretty awful time in America, and to get away from it all, he goes on holiday to Italy, and there he encounters a beautiful woman who just happens to be a monster. She's some kind of fish. But they have a lovely time. The film is a weird kind of mix. It's almost like, Richard Linklater's Before films with Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, with a young couple discovering each other as they go around this beautiful part of Italy. The footage of Italy, some of the drone shots of Pompeii are superb. It's a remarkably well-filmed movie. And then, so it mixes this kind of Linklater-style chat with kind of Lovecraftian horror. It's not like the film Night Tide, where Dennis Hopper seems to be having this affair with a mermaid, but really that's a sort of... The fantasy is almost bleeding into reality, that it's almost his way of thinking about her. She is an actual monster in Spring. So it's a curious kind of mix. But I found the film fascinating and really enjoyable. Much more enjoyable than the follow-up, The Endless, where I think the two filmmakers have got a bit, believed in their own hype, and it became a bit pompous. But this first film, this little tentative film, is really enjoyable, and you should check it out. Now, one of the young Turks of horror in the 2000s was Ty West. You've probably come across his movies. He was quite prolific in that time. I never really bought him as a great filmmaker. His movies were quite enjoyable, but nothing very interesting. But recently, I watched House of the Devil. Now, this is a movie that has divided horror fans. It was made in 2009. And what Ty West did was he deliberately made a retro-style film like 70s horror films. So he brought down the pacing, and it's a very simple story of this teenage, student, and she needs some money, so she goes to babysit for this family out in the woods, obviously in this really dodgy house for this dodgy guy, and that nothing's going to happen, nothing good is going to come out of it. And that's the movie, and actually the vast majority of the running time of the movie, she goes to the house, and you're just watching her wander around the house, waiting for something to happen. And it's just a slow build of eeriness. And then at the end, you just get 10 minutes of boom, 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 real horror as you find out what's going on. So it's a bit of a formal game, a sort of experiment that Ty West is playing, that almost the entire movie is a slow build, and then you just throw the kitchen sink at the audience at the end. It doesn't quite work, and a lot of horror fans found it very disappointing. I kind of liked it actually. It kind of amused me. I liked the retro styling of it. I liked the slow pace. I thought the acting was very good. And there's an interesting sense of humour to the film. And I think it's worth a try. If you want something a bit different for horror and you like those old 70s movies, it's worth a try. The title House of the Devil gives it away. The devil's involved and devil worshippers. Arr. And going back to the 70s, the genuine 70s horror films, I recently discovered a new film that was recommended by Barry, one of my subscribers, so thanks for that, Barry. Brotherhood of Satan. This was a movie that was made in 1970, released in 1971 in America. And it's a classic story where, this family, they're driving through, Nowheresville, Arizona, and they come to this town, and the townspeople appear to be completely mad, actually. And it turns out that the town is in the grip of satanic fever, and these Satanists have taken up home in this town and are preying on the little children and killing people. So far, so cliched. But the treatment of it is anything but cliched. This film starts with one of the best opening sequences I've ever seen to a horror movie. It starts with this image of a tank, a toy tank, and a discarded cola bottle. And it looks like the opening image of a sort of new wave American movie, something like by Arthur Penn or Martin Scorsese, some comment on America, militarism and commercialism side by side, right? And the tank, this little toy tank, starts to move. And then the next thing you see is this image that is weirdly startling of the wheels of a real tank crushing a car. And you can hear this screaming. And you think, what the hell is going on? And then you keep cutting back to the toy tank. And it's only after about 10 minutes of film that you realise what's happened. That actually, this car has actually genuinely been crushed by a tank with people in it, and they've been murdered. And it's only about halfway into the film that you really realise the whole concept of the film is that these Satanists can animate the fantasies of children, their toys, to become real things and kill people with them. But that only comes about halfway through the film. It's an extraordinarily well-made film. It was directed by a no-mark director, Bernard McAveety, who spent most of his life making TV series. He made episodes of The Incredible Hulk and, is it Gunsmoke, I think, an old TV western. Nothing pretty much distinguished. But he'd clearly been watching his Nouvelle Vague. He'd clearly been watching new independent cinema. And the pacing of the movie, the visuals, the styling of it, is really sort of 70s independent cinema. It's a beautiful film, and it has the quality of a really good horror film. It jangles the nerves a bit. You're never quite sure where it's going. It's also kind of interesting because it was produced by L.Q. Jones, and it also features, he acts in it as well as Strother Martin. So, Peckinpah's repertory cast sort of produced this movie and put it together. And Strother Martin turns out to be the head of the Satanists, and he gives a wonderfully blackly comic performance, knowing that the whole material is slightly silly. So he gives it a blackly comic edge, which I think really helps the film. If you've never seen it, check it out. It's a little lost classic. Another movie of this kind of subgenre of, driving through the great American outdoors, and getting lost, is a recent film called Southbound. Now, Southbound was made by the same people who made VHS, a popular compendium movie, which I haven't actually seen. It was made in about 2011. But I watched this movie, and it's also a compendium movie. It's a compendium of stories of people who get lost in Nowheresville, Arizona. But you quickly realise that in this film, that means they are in hell. and they're going through, that idea of when you're in hell, you keep repeating the same nightmare over and over, and these nightmares are all interlinked. It's a modern horror film. I don't usually get on with modern horror films. I prefer, the 60s, 70s era. Actually, I quite enjoyed it. It had some good scares in it. It had some good ideas. It did what a horror film should do, which is keep me on edge. And, there's a lot of gore in it, but it's quite an intelligent film. It's got some great special effects, some really weird monsters in the first story. And I quite like the segue from the second story into the third story, so that the hero of the second story is killed in an accident by the person in the third story. And then you think he's going to drive on, you see, and just leave her to sort of go and die. And you think that's why he's going to get, hunted by the demons who wreak vengeance, fury-like on the people in the stories. But actually he goes back and he tries to take her to a hospital. And he takes her to this abandoned hospital. And he's on the phone to the authorities, and they're sort of saying, this is how to help her out. And of course, all they're telling him to do is killing her. And it's a really horrible scene. It's really gory and it's really grotesque, and it really has you on the edge of your seat. And you realise he's slowly killing her. I've never seen anything quite like it in modern cinema. It's really horrible, really grotesque, and it's good horror. It's good fun. I really enjoyed this movie. It's rare that I see a modern horror film that I like, but I did enjoy this one. If you like Southbound, go back and check out a film that's very hard to find these days, a film called Grim Prairie Tales. This was directed, I think it's a one-off director, Wayne Coe, his name is. Now, this film is also a portmanteau horror film. It's a film made up of little stories. And it's basically a western. And all the stories are set in the Wild West, and they're linked together. Brad Dourif and this other guy, they meet out in the open. They're by a campfire telling each other stories. And I'll be fair, the stories are not that great. It's just interesting to see a western and horror film mix. The second story, though, stays in the memory. And this is where this guy out in the open, in the Wild West, he comes upon this pregnant woman who's in distress, and he comes to her aid. And I don't really want to spoil it, but the pregnant woman is not all she appears to be. And this leads to a brilliant special effects scene at the end of the story, which you'll remember a long time after you've watched the film. It's worth watching the film just for that sequence. Not a great movie, but a kind of, an oddball film that's worth checking out, a kind of cult movie, because it mixes the Western and the horror genre. Another movie that you might not have come across, it kind of appeared for a little bit a few years ago, then vanished again, is a film called November. This is an Estonian film based on a popular Estonian novel, and it was directed by Rainer Sarnat. Now, if you like sort of fairy tale films like The Company of Wolves or Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, films like that, or Beauty and the Beast, you will love this movie. It's in that same kind of world of a fairy tale for adults. So it's almost verging on horror. And it's set in this kind of medieval world, this kind of really grim, dirty, horrible world where people have to thieve and, basically live off each other to survive. And there's these weird creatures that look like sort of circular saws that sort of tore the countryside doing people's bidding. It's a very strange world, all in beautiful black and white photography. It's a film that I was amazed by. It was really original and different, a sort of a mix of avant-garde and horror in one film. And I can't recommend it highly enough. Not many people have seen it, but it's well worth checking out if you get the chance. I think you'll enjoy it. The last two films I want to discuss in this video are both by known directors. And I think they've been underrated in their filmography. The first is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne. This was directed by Valerian Borowczyk. Borowczyk had one of the strangest careers in cinema. He was a Polish director who started out as an animator, made animated short films, sometimes worked with Chris Marker. Then he moved into fiction, feature making, and his films were always very erotic. And some people say that during the 70s he became a bit of a softcore porn director, a sort of art house porn. Nothing wrong with that in my opinion, but some people objected to it. In the early 1980s, he made his version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, there is most people would agree that the best version of Jekyll and Hyde is the Ruben Mamoulian version from 1931 with Frederick March, which I recently re-saw at Il Cinema Ritrovato in Bologna in a new print, and God, it's a great film. I'd forgotten how sophisticated and how intelligent and how witty it is and how brilliant Frederick March's performance is. But actually my secret favourite version of Jekyll and Hyde is this film by Borachik. Kim Newman, the horror critic, said that this film is polymorphously perverse. He's right, and I love that. This is an extraordinary version of the film, right from the very beginning, with this very sort of doom-laden modernist music and this sort of negative, picture of London. And then you see this young girl running through the fog-laden streets being pursued by a man in this kind of nightmarish vision of London. And he's trying to kill her. It doesn't hold, it's no holds barred stuff by Borachik. Udo Kier plays Dr. Jekyll. And when he transforms into a different actor. What can I say about this film? It is a no holds barred vision of Jekyll and Hyde. It is very strange, very brutal. It doesn't hold back from the perversity of the story in any way. But it's also interesting. Although there's some sort of female nudity in it, and there's one very lascivious, wonderful scene where this girl is bent over a sewing machine, if I remember rightly, and having sex with Hyde, and then Patrick McGee comes in, her father, and whips her on the bottom. It's a great film. And then I think she's killed by bow and arrow, if I remember correctly. It's that kind of movie. It's great fun. And there's another bizarre scene where a girl is put to bed and they lay a tablecloth over her. Very strange. Anyway, so there's a sort of leering soft porn quality to it, but it's also a sort of proto-feminist, because at the end, the woman who's going to marry Dr. Jekyll, who's usually the poor little victim of the story, instead, she takes the potion as well. She wants to transform with him and release her inner demons and release her, unfettered desires and will. And brilliantly in the film, they don't take a potion actually. What they do is they get into a bath, and there's this extraordinary sequence where in one shot, Udo Kier gets in this bath and he's thrashing around. Then he goes under the surface, and up comes the other actor, all in one shot. Brilliantly done. It's an extraordinary movie, and I love the ending, where together, Jekyll and Miss Osborne have transformed, and they're in this endless orgy and cycle of biting each other and having sex with each other in a carriage. This endless cycle of, lust and perversity that just will never end. It's a brilliant ending and of a very, I think, subversive film, and I wish more people would see it. I think it's fantastic. I'm going to finish with David Lynch. Good old David Lynch. Everyone knows David Lynch. Everyone likes David Lynch, don't they? But it's interesting to me how Lost Highway has got ignored or forgotten in the mix, because Lost Highway, I think, is a very important early attempt to make a new kind of horror film for the 21st century. Lynch had already tried a prototype of this with Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, which I think is a very underrated film. He took the basic storyline about Laura Palmer from Twin Peaks, and he took it into much darker, more realistic territory, how she'd been abused as a child and so on. I think the film is extraordinary. Flawed, but extraordinary. And this paved the way for Lost Highway. This broken narrative where we start off with Bill Pullman as this jazz saxophonist, and he keeps getting these weird video messages. Someone is, peeping Tom on him and his wife. and then his wife dies and he's accused of the murder. And then when he's in prison, he transforms into a young man who goes off on this different storyline where he gets involved with gangsters. For me, watching the film in 1996 or whenever it came out, I was blown away by it. And I thought, this is a director not only sort of reaching a new level in his craft, but also trying to change an entire genre of cinema and moving it into a new realm of, identity horror, where identity fractures and collapses and transforms. And I don't think that Lynch got anywhere near enough credit for this film and what he was trying to do, and how it paved the way for so much of the cinema, the horror cinema, and art cinema that came in the 21st century. So if you've not seen it, or you have seen it, go back and check it out. I think you'll be surprised by how good it is. And, everyone was bowled over by Mulholland Drive, one of my favourite films. But actually, so much of the great stuff of Mulholland Drive is anticipated in Lost Highway. So go back and check it out. So those are 10, oddball horror films for you to go and check out. Actually, when I was making this list, there's loads more. So if you like this video, let me know, and I'll do another follow-up, another sequel, because I enjoy talking about horror films. And as always, if you like my content, please like and subscribe. Thanks very much.